Welcome to OST 149 Cyber Safety Lesson 4, Cybersecurity at Critical Life Junctures, brought to you by the Nighthawk Cyber Alliance. The first three lessons built your foundation in legal responsibilities, EHR security, and workplace threats. This final lesson takes a different angle, looking at how cybersecurity obligations change and intensify at the most sensitive moments in a patient's life. From birth records to end of life documents, reproductive decisions to genetic testing, this lesson will help you understand why certain data categories carry the strongest protections and what that means for you as a healthcare professional. Throughout our lives, we experience moments of profound vulnerability. Reproductive decisions, genetic discoveries, childhood development, and end of life care. These critical junctures generate some of the most sensitive health data imaginable. From fertility treatments to genetic testing, from pediatric records to advanced directives, this information reveals our most intimate health details and family histories. The data created during these moments carries unique risks because it can affect not just individual patients, but their families across generations. Understanding why these life stages require heightened cybersecurity protections is essential for every healthcare professional. The 2022 Dobbs versus Jackson decision fundamentally changed the legal landscape for reproductive health data. With abortion access now varying by state, reproductive health records face unprecedented legal exposure they did not face before. In response, the 2024 HIPAA Privacy Rule update strengthened protections specifically for reproductive health information, recognizing the elevated risks patients now face when seeking lawful care. Dobbs increased law enforcement subpoenas targeting reproductive records, and the 2024 HIPAA update directly prohibits disclosure of reproductive PHI for legal investigations. New federal protections apply regardless of which state the law enforcement request originates from. The 2024 HIPAA Privacy Rule update establishes clear prohibitions on cross-state law enforcement requests for reproductive protected health information. Healthcare organizations cannot disclose reproductive PHI to law enforcement agencies seeking to investigate or prosecute lawful reproductive care, regardless of the requesting state's laws. Violations of these protections carry significant enforcement risks. In practical terms, this means refuse law enforcement requests related to lawful reproductive care, treat cross-state requests for reproductive PHI as prohibited, and document every interaction around such requests carefully. Violations risk HIPAA enforcement actions and penalties on top of any other legal exposure. Genetic information represents the most permanent and far-reaching data in all of healthcare. Unlike other medical records, genetic data cannot be changed, anonymized through traditional methods, or separated from a patient's identity. A single genetic test reveals information not just about the patient, but about their parents, siblings, children, and extended family members, making a breach of genetic data a breach that affects entire family lineages. Federal laws, including GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, and HIPAA, provide critical protections for this uniquely sensitive information. HIPAA treats genetic data as specially protected PHI, and GINA prohibits discrimination by insurers and employers based on genetic information. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act provides critical protections against genetic discrimination, but its scope is limited in ways healthcare workers need to understand. Title I prohibits health insurers from using genetic information to deny coverage, adjust premiums, or require genetic testing. Title II extends those protections to employment, preventing employers from using genetic data in hiring, firing, or promotion decisions. However, significant gaps exist. GINA does not cover life insurance, disability insurance, or long-term care insurance, leaving patients potentially vulnerable in those sectors. Healthcare workers must understand both what GINA protects and where those protections end, so they can counsel patients accurately about the real risks of genetic testing. In 2023, a massive data breach at 23andMe exposed the sensitive genetic and ancestry information of 6.9 million customers. This incident highlights a critical gap in health data protection. Consumer genetic testing companies are not covered by HIPAA. Unlike clinical genetic tests performed in healthcare settings, direct-to-consumer genetic data lacks the robust privacy safeguards that protect patient information in medical contexts. Clinical genetic tests have stronger privacy protections than consumer tests. Healthcare workers have a professional obligation to inform patients of these differences when patients ask about or use consumer genetic testing services, because many patients assume their 23andMe or Ancestry data has the same legal protections as their hospital records. It does not. Children represent our most vulnerable patient population, unable to consent to the use or disclosure of their own health information. Under HIPAA, parents and legal guardians serve as personal representatives, controlling access to their children's medical records. This creates unique cybersecurity responsibilities for healthcare workers who must safeguard data that will follow these patients throughout their entire lives. A breach of pediatric records does not just expose current health information. It exposes a long-term sensitive history that the child had no ability to protect or consent to. Minors cannot consent to PHI disclosure, parents control access under HIPAA, and every breach of pediatric data exposes a lifetime of sensitive history before the patient can protect themselves. Children's clean Social Security numbers make them prime targets for identity thieves. With no existing credit history, fraudsters can exploit a child's identity for years without detection. Parents rarely monitor their children's credit, which allows criminals to open fraudulent accounts, take out loans, and file false insurance claims, often for years before anyone realizes anything is wrong. The damage typically remains hidden until the child reaches adulthood and applies for their first credit card, student loan, or apartment, only to discover a ruined credit history they never created. This is a silent crime that healthcare workers can help prevent by treating pediatric records with the heightened security they require. Neonatal and birth records contain some of the most sensitive health information in clinical care. These records document genetic screening results, birth complications, maternal health history, and early developmental assessments. From the moment of creation, these records are protected under HIPAA and require the highest standards of security and confidentiality. Healthcare workers in labor, delivery, and neonatal care settings must be especially vigilant because this data is created during a period of clinical urgency, when security protocols can easily be deprioritized in favor of immediate patient care. The sensitivity of these records does not diminish because of the circumstances of their creation. When advanced directives and end-of-life documents are stored digitally in electronic health records, they become electronic protected health information subject to HIPAA security rule requirements. The integrity and availability of these critical documents directly impacts patient safety. Data corruption, unauthorized alterations, or access delays during emergencies can lead to irreversible harm when medical teams cannot honor patient wishes. A patient's do not resuscitate order, living will, or health care proxy designation must be accessible, accurate, and tamper-proof. Digital storage transforms legal documents into ePHI, which means every HIPAA security rule requirement for encryption, access controls, audit logging, and integrity verification applies to them. Many healthcare workers assume that HIPAA protections expire when a patient dies. This is incorrect. Protected health information remains safeguarded for 50 years after a patient's death. Access to deceased patients' records is strictly limited to authorized personal representatives, such as executors or estate administrators. This extended protection is critical because stolen PHI from deceased individuals is actively traded on the dark web, enabling identity theft and fraud targeting grieving families. The records accessed by only executors or estate administrators rule is not just policy. It is a legal requirement, and violations of it carry the same HIPAA enforcement consequences as violations involving living patients. Identity theft does not end when a patient dies. Criminals actively target deceased individuals because their data often goes unmonitored for months or years after death. Healthcare records provide comprehensive identifying information: social security numbers, addresses, dates of birth, insurance details, making them valuable targets even posthumously. Fraudsters exploit this data to open credit accounts, file false tax returns, and commit insurance fraud, causing significant harm to grieving families and estates. Healthcare workers must secure deceased patient records with the same rigor applied to living patients, and proper restriction of access is mandatory under HIPAA for up to 50 years post-mortem. Patients increasingly accumulate digital health assets throughout their lives, including data from wearables, health apps, patient portals, and telehealth platforms. The revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act, known as RUFADAA, grants executors limited access to digital accounts, but platform terms of service often override these rights, creating complex barriers to accessing health information after death. This creates a growing gap between what patients expect their families to be able to access and what the law actually allows. Healthcare workers can play a role in patient education here, encouraging patients to designate digital health data in their estate plans and to understand that their digital health estates raise privacy and access questions that standard estate planning may not address. Mental health and substance use disorder records receive heightened confidentiality protections beyond standard HIPAA requirements. State laws frequently exceed federal privacy baselines, providing additional layers of protection for this sensitive information. The Federal Regulation 42 CFR Part 2 imposes stricter requirements than HIPAA specifically for substance use disorder treatment records, requiring explicit patient authorization for most disclosures. The reason for these heightened protections is straightforward. Unauthorized disclosure of mental health and substance use records risks stigma, discrimination, and real harm to patients' employment, housing, and relationships. Healthcare workers must understand and comply with these protections and must know when state law provides stronger protection than HIPAA, because when it does, the stronger state law controls. IVF records, embryo records, and genetic data from assisted reproductive technologies are protected by multiple overlapping legal frameworks, including GINA, HIPAA, and various state laws. These records contain uniquely sensitive genetic information that can affect not only the patients themselves, but also donors and future offspring, making breaches particularly consequential across multiple families and generations. Multiple overlapping legal frameworks apply simultaneously to reproductive technology data, and the complexity of those frameworks requires healthcare workers in fertility and reproductive medicine settings to understand all applicable regulations. A breach of IVF records is not just a patient privacy violation, it is a breach that can affect people who were never patients of the organization. When courts issue orders for patient record disclosure, healthcare workers must navigate carefully between legal compliance and patient privacy protection. The key principle is disclosing only the minimum necessary information required by the order and doing so only through proper legal channels. Voluntary or informal disclosures without proper authorization risk. HIPAA violations and compromise patient trust even when the intent is to be helpful. Informal or verbal requests never authorize PHI disclosures. Only documented court orders through established procedures carry legal weight. Every disclosure must follow established procedures and be thoroughly documented, because the documentation itself is what protects the organization if the disclosure is later challenged. Transplant records contain some of the most sensitive data in healthcare, including genetic compatibility information, donor and recipient medical histories, and organ allocation details. These records are managed by the United Network for Organ Sharing, known as UNOS, and are subject to HIPAA as well as specific federal regulations governing organ transplantation. Breaches of transplant records risk more than patient privacy. They can compromise the integrity of the entire organ allocation process, which is a life and death system for patients on transplant waiting lists. Genetic compatibility data links donors, recipients, and their families in ways that extend the impact of any breach well beyond the immediate patients. Hospice and palliative care settings handle some of the most sensitive health information imaginable. Pain management protocols, end-of-life wishes, family communications, and deeply personal care preferences. These records require the highest level of protection, yet many hospice organizations face significant cybersecurity challenges due to limited IT resources and smaller operational budgets compared to large healthcare systems. That resource gap does not reduce the legal obligation. Cybersecurity competency is a key professional obligation in hospice and palliative care settings, and workers in these environments must apply the same standards that apply in large hospital systems, regardless of the organization's size or technical capacity. Cybersecurity in healthcare is grounded in four core ethical principles: autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice. When data breaches occur during life's most vulnerable moments, the harm extends far beyond exposed information. It damages patient trust, autonomy, and well-being in ways that are often irreversible. Protecting sensitive health data is not merely a technical or legal requirement. It is a fundamental ethical obligation rooted in the same principles that guide every other clinical decision healthcare workers make. Failures in cybersecurity at critical life junctures violate all four of those principles simultaneously, which is why the ethical dimension of data protection deserves as much weight as the legal dimension. The 21st Century Cures Act mandates increased health data interoperability, enabling more systems and parties to access sensitive PHI than ever before. While this improves care coordination, it simultaneously expands the attack surface for cybersecurity threats. More systems and more parties gaining access to sensitive PHI means more potential points of failure, more vendors with PHI access, and more opportunities for breaches to originate outside the organization. Healthcare workers must balance data sharing obligations with protection responsibilities, carefully evaluating every data request. Information blocking rules increase data sharing mandates, but expanded access heightens cybersecurity risks. And those two realities must be managed together. While HIPAA establishes a federal baseline for health information privacy, many states have enacted laws that provide stronger protections for sensitive data categories. States like California and New York have implemented comprehensive privacy laws covering reproductive and genetic data that exceed federal requirements. When state law offers greater protection than HIPAA, the more protective state law takes precedence and must be followed, not the federal baseline. Healthcare workers must know which state laws apply in their jurisdiction and understand that compliance with HIPAA alone may not be sufficient depending on where they practice. California and New York lead with comprehensive privacy statutes, but this landscape is evolving rapidly across all 50 states. Artificial intelligence is revolutionizing genetic data analysis, creating powerful new capabilities that are outpacing existing legal protections. Polygenic risk scores, AI generated predictions based on multiple genetic variants, represent a new category of health data that may not be fully covered by current laws, like GINA. As these technologies evolve, significant gaps in regulatory frameworks are emerging, leaving patients potentially vulnerable to discrimination and privacy violations in ways the law has not yet addressed. Legal frameworks are evolving but lag behind technology, and healthcare workers should stay informed on regulatory changes in this space. The AI generated health data of today may become the unprotected sensitive data of tomorrow. Unlike European GDPR regulations, U.S. healthcare law does not provide patients with a broad right to have their health records deleted. HIPAA allows patients to request amendments and corrections to their medical records, but healthcare organizations are not required to erase data. Patients may request corrections but not deletion under HIPAA. However, emerging state laws and FTC rules are beginning to expand deletion rights in certain contexts, signaling potential future changes to this framework. Healthcare workers must understand both the current limitations on deletion rights and the direction those rights are moving, because patients increasingly ask about them and expect accurate information. Healthcare workers must be prepared to protect patient data throughout the entire human lifespan, from birth records and pediatric data through reproductive health, genetic information, and ultimately end of life and posthumous records. This comprehensive responsibility requires integrating legal knowledge and ethical principles into daily practice. Understanding the interconnected frameworks of HIPAA, GINA, state laws, and professional ethics creates a foundation for consistent, competent data protection across all life stages. Cybersecurity is not a specialty skill for this work. It is a core professional competency that spans every patient interaction across every stage of life. This slide connects all 4 lessons of this module into a single picture. Lesson 1 built the legal and ethical foundations of cybersecurity. Lesson 2 covered EHR security and data protection in health. IT Lesson 3 addressed public health and workplace threats. And this lesson, Lesson 4, addressed sensitive life stage data protections. Each lesson focused on distinct but interconnected aspects of healthcare data protection, and together they prepare you for real-world cybersecurity challenges in healthcare settings. The knowledge from all 4 lessons works together. Legal frameworks, technical controls, workplace vigilance, and life stage sensitivity are all part of the same professional responsibility. Cybersecurity is not a one-time achievement. It is a lifelong professional responsibility. As threats evolve and new technologies emerge, healthcare workers must commit to continuous learning and adaptation. Laws, regulations, and best practices will continue to change, requiring ongoing vigilance throughout your career. Your dedication to protecting patient data is fundamental to maintaining the trust that underpins the entire healthcare system. That trust is not abstract. It is what allows patients to disclose sensitive information, seek care for stigmatized conditions, and share genetic data that affects their entire family. When you protect that data, you protect that trust. This lesson has explored the heightened cybersecurity requirements for protecting health data at life's most sensitive moments. Reproductive, genetic, pediatric, and end-of-life records carry the strongest legal protections because breaches at these stages cause irreversible harm to patients and families. Healthcare workers bear a professional obligation to safeguard this data across the entire lifespan. From birth records to posthumous protections, from neonatal units to hospice settings, from fertility clinics to transplant programs, life's critical junctures carry the strongest legal protections for good reason. Data breaches at these stages have serious and lasting consequences that no technical remediation can fully reverse. That brings us to the end of OST 149 Cyber Safety Lesson 4, Cybersecurity at Critical Life Junctures, brought to you by the Nighthawk Cyber Alliance. In this lesson, you covered why life's most sensitive moments require the strongest protections, the 2024 HIPAA Reproductive Health Update and its practical implications, genetic data and GINA, the 23andMe breach, pediatric records, pediatric identity theft, neonatal data, advanced directives, posthumous PHI protection, posthumous identity theft, digital estate planning, mental health, and 42 CFR Part 2, reproductive technology data, court-ordered disclosures, organ transplant records, hospice cybersecurity, ethics at critical junctures, interoperability risks, state law patchwork, AI and genomics, the right to be forgotten, and lifespan-wide data responsibility. You have now completed all 4 lessons of the OST 149 Cyber Safety module. Congratulations, and carry this knowledge with you throughout your career.